War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Mayor Giuliani, where do you put this? There's a poll out: 52% of the American people think this is a Russian disinformation campaign.
It's very discouraging.
But 48%. I actually take it differently. I take it as very encouraging with all the suppression by the mainstream media.
Good.
Yes, come on, brother.
This is what I had
to do in 16.
I never expected propaganda to win in America. I mean, this can't be more false.
I did run Breitbart. No,
I know.
What are you talking about? Propaganda always wins. Rudy, get that number 2 pencil out. Write that down.
Okay,
Propaganda always wins.
We're going to flip that to 48. When I took over the president's case, he was 62% of the American people believed it. When I finished, it was only 38. So I like low numbers.
Thank you. Well, no, look, we've come up based on what. That's why you're going to be everywhere over this weekend. You're going to be everywhere, and as you're more on local radio and TV, this is punching through. People, this is the Streisand effect. People, listen, with no support, no mainstream media support, little War Room Pandemic, a couple of National Pulse, a handful of other small sites, and Rudy G out there at the tip of the spear on AM radio. 48% of the American people saying, "Hey, there's a problem here." That's called a victory. We'll cross 50% this weekend, right? All we need is the President of the United States. Write this down. All you need is to call Ray over for a cup of coffee. Just call him over for a cup of coffee and a chat. And you have your 10 questions. Okay, I'm gonna go to question number 3. Don't fire him in the room. I know Bannon keeps saying that, but don't fire him in the room. Just have him over for a cup of coffee, and maybe bring his boss too. Bring the Attorney General, and they can have a chat afterwards about special prosecutors. Right? The president's not going to order him to do it. But, Mayor, as you sit here and look at this, should there be a special prosecutor, and should the FBI director be terminated?
Yes and yes. And the way the conversation should go is, Mr. Director, you had the Brennan letter for 4 years. You had this hard drive for 1 year. Both of them completely exculpate me, completely make me innocent of what I was impeached for. And you didn't bring them to me? Now, is there a reason for that? And then he may say, Mr. President, I have to look into it. In which case he should say, well, you're fired, because no FBI director should have to look into it. An FBI director should be able to come into the President of the United States office with the answer to a highly significant question like that. I mean, this is ridiculous that this was not, and then Barr should be asked, did he hide this from you? And then we'll find out what Barr's answer is. And if Barr's answer is that he hid it from him, I don't know, maybe we put Ray under investigation for obstruction of justice. What's he doing hiding things like this? These things relate to crimes. They relate to crimes. I know the FBI screws around with obstruction of justice and makes these stupid cases like on General Flynn. How about we make a real case on them?
Okay, and I think I said Preet Braha in the Southern District also should be under investigation. But last night, the FBI announced or leaked to James Rosen, who's one of the best reporters out there, that they've actually, the hard drive we're actually looking at, and it's part of an ongoing money laundering investigation. I understand you know a lot of details about that, but isn't that a classic misdirection? Because these money laundering things take forever. It's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars. A couple of bankers will go to Club Fed, right? And you'll hear about it in the year 2024 on the page 15 next to the tire ads in the Wall Street Journal, right? And nobody will care. It's a total misdirection when they say the money laundering situation. Right now, the two crimes are he's compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. Jack Maxey's been up now 48 hours dumping just documents, dumping term sheets, joint venture agreements, wire transfers, all of that. So I want to ask you, the compromise and the child endangerment, that's the two big issues before us today, is it not, sir?
Yeah. The compromise is proven. I can think of 50 documents that prove, any one of which would disqualify you for a classification of any kind, and any one of which, if we had a country where our press cared about our country would disqualify the candidate for president. I mean, for example, let's take the one we have on audio tape, in which Hunter says he's working as partners with a Chinese spy master and one of the chief intelligence people who's one of the richest men in China. Now, his father, Joe, is part of that deal. That's the 10% deal. That's the one where we have two other documents saying he's part of it. That's the one where Bubalinsky says he's part of it. And if you look carefully at the audio recording, he himself says, my father and I are going to be called as witnesses. And his father didn't know anything about his foreign dealings, and he's being called as a witness. And he gets a special courtesy call from the United States attorney, which is, I was the United States attorney. I didn't tip people off about investigations. I did investigations of Republicans. I didn't tip them off. I had to recommend a special prosecutor for my boss, who I thought was innocent, Ed Meese. But I had to do it. The law required me to do it. That's what a U.S. attorney does. U.S. attorney doesn't make a sleazy little phone call to suck up to Joe Biden. Not unless he's a sleazy little politician.
Mayor, real quickly, so you're saying he would not be able to get a security clearance just on the compromise part. There's 50 documents short. I know we only got you for a few more minutes. I want to go to the child endangerment. You know, Joe Biden's had as a wingman now his granddaughter. Ever since these allegations came up, all of a sudden the granddaughter's going to mass with him. She was in Florida yesterday traveling with him. What is the situation with the child endangerment? And to your knowledge, you and Bernie Kerik turned these documents over to law enforcement. Has anything happened to check on the welfare of the granddaughter?
The Delaware police, instead of visiting the home, which I believe they're required to do, gave it to the FBI so they could put it in the circular file. And as far as I know, the FBI has done nothing to investigate the statement by Hunter Biden himself to his father that he's a danger to the kids. Now, you can speculate about how much danger when you look at the other texts and the incredibly disgusting photos, 29,000. You can speculate as to how big a danger. But he said he was a danger. He at least has to be sat down by law enforcement in an interview room and asked, what did you mean by that? Here are pictures of you walking around that house with no clothes on, smoking crack. The crack had to be smelled all over the house. There were two minor children here. Is that what you mean by you were a danger to them? Or is the therapist right? You were taking your clothes off in front of them. I mean, these questions have to be asked. I don't care if you're Prince Andrew. Well, even Prince Andrew maybe should be asked those questions.
So Mayor, we got about a minute left. This is what I understand. With that level of evidence that's on this hard drive, please explain to our audience how the FBI, the director of the FBI, cannot immediately forget whether he's going to investigate the Bidens. How can they not see this back a year ago and immediately have some sort of intervention or some sort of checking as is required by law to do? Tell me, they have essentially broken the law by not moving on this. Is that your belief?
I believe there's a good possibility the law of Delaware was broken, where there's a mandatory reporting requirement for everybody. I'm not sure the exact interpretation of it, but there's certainly a good question about that. And there's no question that you have I'll tell you what the two detectives that viewed it for me said, to me and Bernie Kerik. And they said it to me very strongly, even though I was their boss. They said, boss, you have an obligation to do this. I said, I'm not a mayor. Or he said, you have an obligation to do it as a man.
Mayor Giuliani, thank you very much. When's your new podcast? Is your new podcast already up?
There'll be one up today in which we do the best we can to summarize the key evidence so that people can understand this large picture. And basically it shows that over the 8 years he was vice president, his family got minimum $40 million.
Mayor, we got to bounce. We'll put the podcast up. Thank you very much for joining us. Understand you're under pressure today. Thank you, sir.